It is said that to understand humanity we must look at what it creates, and this could not be more true when it comes to what we create for our entertainment. The types of shows and books and films we watch and listen to are very indicative of the times we live in, and say a lot about the psyche of the people. And when in our darkest hour and darkest times, people tend to think of the brighter things, the greater things, the higher possibilities that our race can achieve. In times of hopelessness, we look to something greater and better than ourselves, something we can strive to be. The character of this particular documentary is one such example. Created during a time of depression and hopelessness, he was one of those creations that helped bring light to the lives of many who felt were stuck in darkness. I am of course talking about the one and only Clark Savage Jr., or as he is better known, Doc Savage. The Man of Bronze, the modern Hercules, the original Man of Steel, the original Superman. Whatever name he goes by, it's still the same. He's an adventurer, a scientist, an explorer, a healer. And yet, despite all this, still human. Something that, in many ways, we can strive to be. Join me as we take a look over this character's remarkable evolution and the many ups and downs he has experienced throughout his literary career, which in many ways echo the ups and downs that he experienced on his many adventures. This is Doc Savage. Our adventure begins in 1933. The Great Depression was in full swing, annihilating the economy, drying up finances, and causing living standards to collapse. Amidst all this chaos and ruin, people looked for escapism, and those who could provide it were rewarded with great fortunes. One such group was the publisher Street and Smith, who produced magazines that had something for anybody and had enjoyed a runaway hit with The Shadow in 1931. Realizing that there was a market for heroes with seemingly superhuman abilities, Henry W. Ralston and John L. Nanovic sat down and brainstormed, trying to think of a new character that would enable them to capitalize further on the success they had enjoyed with the Dark Avenger. However, instead of a creature of the night, they instead came up with something lighter, more adventurous, more expansive, and quickly came up with a short premise establishing the outlines of the character they wanted, and handed it over to Lester Dent, a writer and himself an amateur inventor, gadget man, and adventurer, very different from the magician-journalist Walter Gibson who had helped flesh out The Shadow. In developing the character further, Dent described him as having, among many other things, the brilliant mind of Sherlock Holmes, the power and strength of Tarzan, and the goodness of Abraham Lincoln, and even going so far as to say that Doc had a sort of Christliness to him. In addition, some Lester Dent biographers also think that another inspiration may have been an actual army officer and writer, Richard Henry Savage, who himself wrote adventure stories and was known to have led a very expansive life, as well as another novel, this time by Philip Wiley, called The Savage Gentleman, which dealt with a man taking his son to an island and training him up. Eventually, in March of 1933, the first issue, The Man of Bronze, hit newsstands and was a success, spawning what was to be 181 issues between 1933 and 1949. However, as fantastical and grandiose as they might have gotten at times, Dent always kept them fundamentally rooted in some sort of scientific possibility. The novels even essentially predicting inventions like TVs, answering machines, and night vision. And though he had been trained since childhood to have superhuman intelligence and strength, Doc was not alone in these adventures. He was joined by 5 close friends, his Iron Crew, or as they were sometimes known, the Fabulous Five, whom he had met way back in World War One. Monk, a chemist, Ham, a lawyer, Johnny, an archaeologist and geologist, Long Tom, a master electrician, and Rennie, an engineer. And from time to time were even joined by Doc's own cousin, Pat, who also shared his bronze complexion. Over the course of his many adventures, he and his crew made their headquarters on the 86th floor of the Empire State Building, and Doc even had his own retreat called the Fortress of Solitude. Yeah, that's right, you heard me, but we'll get back to that tidbit later. Now, of course, success in the pulps wasn't exactly going to go unnoticed, and it would only figure that adaptations in other media would follow. In radio, which was the most popular medium of the time, there would be 2 separate Doc Savage series, one in 1934 and the other in 1943. The former was a serial which ran for 26 episodes, and the other was based not on the pulps but on the comic book version of the character, which we'll get into in a second. Sadly, though, like a lot of programs from this era, no audio survives, though some scripts do. Getting into the comics, The Shadow had just enjoyed success in the medium, and not long after, in fact in the same year, 1940, Doc would get his own series, and originally they were based on the pulps, but with the 5th issue, Doc was transformed into a more conventional superhero when he landed in Tibet and found a mystical gemstone, which gave him powers. However, this series would only last 20 issues, and ended in 1943, though occasionally this version of Doc would appear in Shadow Comics. And with that, we close this chapter on Doc's history. Join me for part 2, where we find out what happened after the end of the pulps, his continuing adventures in print, and of course, the 1975 movie with Ron Ely. See you then.